Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to Warzone in Depth. In today's episode, I'm going to be going over the Season 4 patch notes, and these are the biggest patch notes that I may have ever done for Warzone. Absolutely massive, radical, and game-changing. Not just the new content and points of interest and new weapons, but the balance on several weapons, the ground loot changes and everything has changed Warzone, and based on my brief experience playing in the evening, probably all for the better. So you can see the time limit on this video. Without wasting any more of your time, let's go ahead and jump right in. Two new weapons were added into the battle pass, the MG82 light machine gun, which you can unlock at level 15, and it is absolutely downright filthy based on my experience with the ground loot. It shoots really fast and has low recoil, and the C58 assault rifle at level 31, which also has low recoil but doesn't shoot particularly fast, but the damage is still high. The Nailgun is unlockable via in-game challenges. I think you have to get 5 kills with special weapons across 15 different games, which is really slow, or you can buy it for, I think it's 1,000 or 10,000 CoD points, which is incredibly inexpensive, and it has no attachment, so that one's pretty much automatically good to go. If you want to purchase the battle pass, if you want to just buy these weapons or spend money on stuff like that, you can use code DRIFTOR in the store to support me. Because of the way the code is set up, it has to be all caps and the O is a 0 like on the number pad, thus making the video sponsored by Activision. So if you're spending battle pass money, keep me in mind. If not, no worries, and if you're a super grinder, all the more to you, because that's usually me. I prefer grinding instead of paying. So the number one thing I want to point out in the beginning is that the ground loot pools have changed radically. There's just a totally different set of weapons on the ground. A lot of Groza, a lot of Milano, a lot of light machine guns, and the ground loot is really strong now. When we get into the weapon balancing patch part of this video, you'll know why, but most of the ground loot weapons are very good. They added the dirt bikes in all modes, and the self-revive spawn rates have been significantly reduced. After playing for 2 hours, I only found one of them last night, and that seems fair. The dirt bikes are insanely fast, but also very difficult to control. They don't kill you when you fall off of them PUBG style, but they're not the easy vehicle that everybody dreamed that they would be. The Cold War 1911 pistol, which is your starting pistol, got a really unique nerf to reduce its melee damage, so it now takes 3 hits to down somebody instead of just 2, and this is a really good change because what would happen before is you would land, somebody would land next to you, you would get the gun, and they would just 2-tap you super fast before you could even pick up the gun and chamber around. And the same thing if you had a loadout, people could sneak up and just 2-tap you super fast with a pistol. Now it takes 3, which balances out the pistol fights, and the meta now is to shoot them once or twice and then go for the 2-tap. So we got a lot more variety going on there. The SNAPSHOT grenade got a very sneaky little buff. It now shows enemies to your teammates as well. Previously, it was just you and you had to make callouts, but now when you snapshot somebody, the entire team can see them, and the time for which they're highlighted went from 1.25 seconds to 2 seconds, so that's a very significant buff, and I think that snapshot grenades really might be worth using now in squads and trios. You can save custom mods of your Cold War weapons, thank goodness, because every time I used to unequip a Cold War weapon, I would have to re-kit it and reconfigure it and put it back together the next time I needed it, but now you can save mods of Cold War weapons just like you can for Modern Warfare 19, so you can save them and use them when you need them. The specialist token has been removed from the game. They said it was a little bit too powerful, a little bit too easy to get, and I kind of agree with them. They said it might come back in the future, but for now it's gone. That's all for the simple stuff. We are going to jump into the balancing patch notes. First thing we're going to do is talk about the barrels. Pretty much all of the barrels in the game have been reworked, and then we're going to talk about the 12 or 15 guns that got rebalanced, some of them quite radically, like the Scar is a good gun now. So let's start off with the Cold War snipers. Cold War snipers combat recon barrel got buffed across every single sniper in that class, some of them as little as 2%, some of them up to 7%. So an easy way to think about it is if you were using the combat recon barrel, it roughly boosted your bullet velocity by 5%, so it's a little buff there. The Ranger barrel for Cold War assault rifles got reworked. It now grants 50% velocity, 15% vertical recoil control, and I'm using a lot of space to write that out there because vertical recoil control means less recoil, so 15% less recoil. However, your hipfire spread is 20% wider, so if you run one of these barrels, you get more velocity, more recoil control, but worse hipfire spread, so it's harder to use in close quarters combat. The takedown barrels for Cold War assault rifles got a 35% maximum damage range boost, a 15% reduction in horizontal recoil, which is probably more important than almost anything else in the game as far as recoil is concerned, and the same hipfire penalty. As you'll note on a lot of these, they're almost all going to have hipfire penalties, and the biggest barrels was the reinforced heavy and the Spetsnaz. So these got a near complete and total radical rework. When you look at them in the game, it's like plus 4 or 5 things and then minus 4 or 5 things. And I'm just going to explain the basics of this. So the reinforced heavy barrels now improves both vertical and horizontal recoil. You gain more recoil control in both aspects of that. It will improve both range and velocity, though not as much as the individual attachments back there like the Ranger and stuff like that, but still improvements to basically everything. However, you're going to get hip penalties to both your hip fire, which is sometimes a massive penalty, your aim down sights, your strafe speed, and your shooting moving speed. So when you equip one of these, they are truly a heavy barrel. Yes, low recoil. Yes, great range. Boo to ADS, boo to hipfire, boo to strafing, and it's effectively a buff to the weapon for its actual assault rifle attributes and a nerf for its SMG attributes, because what players were doing for a very long time is they were using Cold War assault rifles as submachine guns because none of the weapons had the bullet velocity or recoil control to be useful at long ranges. With these new sets of attachments, you can actually use them at long ranges quite well, but they're pretty brutal to use up close. It's a little bit of the way of a lazy way out, but these Spetsnaz and Task Force barrels, the final barrels in the game, modify the same stats as the reinforced heavy. So they both get extra range and velocity, lower recoil, and penalties to pretty much all of your mobility and handling. But the bonuses are slightly scaled up. So with the Spetsnaz and Task Force barrel, you'll get even more bullet velocity and range, even more recoil reduction, but it handles even slower and has even worse hipfire and even slower strafe speed. So what they've kind of done is made it to where almost any barrel attachment that you put on these weapons, except for maybe the first 1 or 2 that changes strafe speed, is going to make them slower and worse of a close quarters weapon, but better at long ranges. And as you move down the list, effectively it gets better and better at long range and worse at close range. So you have to pick the point at which you're comfortable with. And yes, I will be doing a whole video on this later this week, probably. But yeah, basically the barrels are going to radically reduce your recoil, but they're going to have massive penalties elsewhere. And any barrel that will reduce your recoil is also going to increase your hipfire spread so that you can't use these like SMGs. I'm kind of repeating myself at this point, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next section of individual weapon nerfs, of which and buffs, of which there's quite a lot. So the CR56 AMAX got a chest multiplier nerf from 1.2 down to 1.1, so a little change to time to kill and damage there. Still a very popular weapon, still a very predictable weapon, but they're just constantly trying to scale back the king, and they're trying to add some new kings. This next section is going to get absolutely insane. The Groza got multiplier buffs both to the torso and to the upper chest. It got minimum damage buffs, and it got basically just an overall damage buff to have faster time to kill. The Groza got a 12% range reduction, and it's basically supposed to be a close quarters combat assault rifle now, very similar to how the FFAR was being used. Now, I'm going to skip over all the numbers because it would just be a giant mess on the screen, and we're going to skip straight to the time to kill. The Groza will kill in 480 milliseconds if you're hitting upper chest shots only, which is absurdly fast. That's close to like AS Val kind of fast. That's like Finnick kind of fast. That's faster than the Modern Warfare 19 MP5. I think that's a very good comparison. And it's very similar to the Cold War AK-47. So if you were using the Cold War AK in close quarters combat, the Groza will now do basically the same thing, but with bigger mag, potentially better handling, and much better iron sights. So the Groza is kind of a close range monster now. More interestingly, the Scar H got massive buffs to its neck and upper torso multiplier. Again, basically a time to kill buff, so that as long as you're hitting upper chest, neck, or head, the time to kill on this weapon is going to be much faster. When you math it out, the new Scar time to kill, if you're hitting all upper torso, which is chest shots, is 525 milliseconds. This is the same time to kill as the Modern Warfare MP5, which I think many of you are familiar with, and is very fast and would put it up amongst the faster killing assault rifles in this game. The Scar can now shred people as long as you're hitting upper body torso, and they talked about it, they talked about not wanting to make it too strong, want to make it too good. It's still a difficult weapon in that your magazine capacity is limited, and it still kicks like a mule, and it can be awkward to handle, but if you can control the recoil, it can be an extremely effective assault rifle in terms of time to kill. The XM4 got a neck multiplier increase of 1.0 up to 1.5, so that's going to be the same as the head, so it basically rewards headshots a little bit more. The AMP63 pistol, which was the previous new weapon, got massive buffs to its base damage and its body multipliers. Again, instead of putting a whole bunch of confusing numbers all over the screen and going over each individual one of them, we're going to skip ahead to the time to kill section. So with the new AMP63, if you're shooting somebody in the chest only, upper chest, you know, boobs and up, it'll kill in 552 milliseconds, which is extremely similar to the Bullfrog time to kill. I think it's only a few milliseconds different. So the AMP63, your pocket pistol, now has the potential to be as good as the Bullfrog as long as you're hitting your shots. That's a pretty big change to the meta because it means that you now no longer actually have to take overkill, and that if you want to, for at least a very short time, you can run the AMP63 and it will be as good as a Bullfrog for exactly one gunfight. The ballistic knife, of all things, surprisingly got a buff. It got multiplier buffs for more than one area, basically increasing the amount of areas where you can get one-shot kills, and it got a buff to its velocity, so it no longer drops off as fast and it shoots a little bit further with a little bit less leading. They're trying to make the ballistic knife a much better weapon, and they might actually be able to do so successfully. It should now one-shot people to the chest, though I do admit I haven't tested it. The Streetsweeper caught a very significant nerf. It got its damage range reduced by 24%, and it got a little bit of a movement speed nerf as well. So that kind of got nerfed into the ground. I think the Streetsweeper will still be fine in truly like in-your-face close quarters combat, but it won't quite be the hallway cleaner that it was before. Cold War 50 caliber sniper rifle, the name of which is completely eclipsing me now at 3 in the morning when I'm trying to edit all this, got some body multiplier increases and 7% more bullet velocity, which is nice, so it's going to deal more damage even if you're not hitting them in the head. But let's talk about some really interesting ones with the submachine guns. The Modern Warfare 19 AUG SMG now has a 1.1x multiplier for upper chest shots, which puts it at a similar time to kill as the AUG SMG if you were running the 5.56 ammunition, but now without the recoil and reload and movement speed penalties and the penalty of just having to use an attachment to get that time to kill buff. So the basic AUG without the ammo conversion is now effectively just as good as the AUG with the ammo conversion, though to be fair, I am yet to test the ammo conversion. If they apply this multiplier to the ammo conversion, the AUG's just going to be absolutely absurd, and that's some testing for tomorrow. To add some numbers to this, that AUG SMG chest time to kill, you can see how tired and struggly I am here, is 480 milliseconds, which is super fast. You know, that's kind of closer to Finnick time. That's kind of getting closer to AS Val time. If you're hitting chest and up, it'll absolutely shred people. Recoil on that one can be a little bit awkward, so you probably won't be able to do that. KSP got a 17% range buff, and the extremity multiplier got moved up from 0.9 to 1.0, so it'll be more consistent. I have seen some people using it. My chat was going crazy last night, everybody saying it's the new best gun. I'm still skeptical because it's an awkward burst weapon, but I will be testing it out later. And perhaps the biggest change, this is my most meta prediction here, the Milano is going to be meta. It now has a time to kill if you're shooting chest and up at 520 milliseconds. This is slightly faster than the Modern Warfare 19 MP5, which I've used over and over again in this episode because I believe that's a very good standard of your time to kill. But what's very important about this is that the Milano can have a 55 round mag, it can have these really fast Cold War attachments, and it's absurdly low recoil. The Milano can absolutely laser people. It is not hard at all to get all upper chest and headshots with this gun, and I did it a little bit in Plunder, and I did it a lot in actual Battle Royale, and of all of the weapons that my squad tested out, everybody agreed the Milano is probably the best new one. Is it going to be your go-to SMG for point-blank close quarters combat where you're hip-fire and spraying and praying? No, the MP5 and some other guns are going to do that better because you don't have to worry about where your shots hit. But for a consistent like backup weapon where you need to break it out and beam people, it works fantastically. There was a nearly unnoticeable 1 damage point buff on the MW19 Bison that I don't entirely understand at the moment, so we'll revisit that later in the future. And the DMR-14 got a healthy recoil reduction. It's a little bit more usable now. The damage and range and all of that is the same. I used it a little bit in game and I found it to be entirely appropriate. So those are all of the gun changes. Now what's interesting about this is that the Milano, the Groza, and both of the new weapons are in the ground loot, along with the Nailgun, which is downright filthy. I didn't even talk about the Nailgun. They added the Nailgun into the game. It has the range of 0 and garbage, but it subjectively, I have not yet tested it, seems to shred people very effectively up close. I had a lot of fun playing with it tonight. And the skins for it are fun. It's going to be like a neat thing to pick up on the ground. It may not really out-edge SMGs, but it'll be worth carrying around as a novelty weapon that can really kill people instead of just do nothing like the ballistic knife. Guys, that is all for this very frantic episode of In Depth. The patch notes were massive. This is the fast and dirty version of them. It's going to take a couple of days for everything to settle and for everybody to get back on top of their meta and everything. And my number one prediction is that you're going to see a lot of people using the Milano because that gun is pretty filthy now. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. You could interact with me on my second channel, on Twitter, on Twitch, or you could just leave a nice comment. Drifter out.